Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where we bridge the gap between academics and practical marketing. Each week, we sit down and go deep behind the science of some of America's most successful brands. I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
And today we're sitting with Dr. Susan Weinschenk, behavioral scientist, writer, speaker, and a leading voice in applying psychology to design and user experience. Let's get into it. Susan, welcome to Behavioral Science for Brands. We're so excited to have you here today.
I am so glad to be here.
We always like to do a little feature on the folks that come on the show. So if you'll let me, if indulge me just for 30 seconds, I'll give our listeners a little background on you, and then we can have our conversation. So Susan, you're the Chief Behavioral Scientist and CEO at Team W, where you consult with everyone from large companies to startups on how to apply behavioral science to create more effective communications and experiences. You're the author of a number of influential books, including 100 Things That Every Designer Needs to Know About People, which, as we were talking about before the show started, is packed with practical science-based strategies for influencing behavior that Richard and I are huge fans of. And you've spent over 30 years studying what motivates people and how to design the way humans actually think, decide, and behave. We're thrilled to have you here to have a conversation and learn from you. And our listeners love stories. So we thought we'd start with an opening story. How did you get introduced to this world of behavioral design, applying psychology to user experience? Where was your first moment where you learned about this field and got interested?
Oh, well, we're going to go far back in time. And I'm not even going to tell you the year. Although, as I describe the scene, you might start to guess. I don't know. So I was in graduate school, and I have a PhD in psychology. And I went to graduate school at Penn State University, and they have a language requirement for graduate students, but they had this weird twist where you could opt to take a programming language instead of a foreign language.
Oh,
and I was kind of like, well, I don't know, that sounds interesting. I had never done any programming, so I said, I'm going to do it. So I signed up for this programming class. Now, this is so far back that to program the computer, you did it with these cards, with punch cards. You may have seen that in some old black and white movies or something. And so I did my first program. I'm all excited. I hand it to the guy who runs it through the computer. And then you wait, because you didn't talk to the computers. You didn't interact with them. I wait for my printout to appear. And it was like some program that was supposed to add up some numbers and give you an answer. And it came back and it said, job aborted. And I thought, what? and I still remember the moment. I'm in this building because I remember looking at the clock and thinking, wait a minute, this kind of communication to humans is not going to work. How are we supposed to get anything done with computers if this is the way it communicates? The computers should be communicating in ways that work for us as the humans. We should design for humans, right? And that was the moment. Now, I didn't realize that this was already a thing. I was studying psychology, how people think, how people learn. I didn't know that psychology and computer science had already been put together. A whole field called, human factors. I didn't know about it. But that was the moment that I said, this is what I want to do. I want to apply what I know about psychology and behavior to the design of technology so that it works better for the people. And that was my aha moment. And then everything came from that.
When you think back on that story and the career you've had since then, the technology is changing so rapidly. How has the human factors, how has the computer's ability to interact in the way that you were hoping back then, how has that changed as the technology has gone through so many so many evolutions.
Yeah, the technology has changed a lot. Humans don't change that much, actually. It takes them kind of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years to change. So it's been very fun and very interesting to see the cycles. And I've been doing this long enough that I got to see all the cycles. It's like, oh yeah, graphical user interfaces. Very excited. Yeah. Oh, the internet. Yeah, yeah, very excited. Oh, AI, very excited. Right. I've gone through all of those, and it's kind of interesting to see the cycles of how we apply what we know about humans to the design of that new technology, whatever that new technology is. Obviously, if you're just talking about the technology being user friendly, that has improved, immensely in many ways. But I also find it kind of funny that right now, at least with some of the AI tools, guess what? We're back to just typing. Yeah. In one line. It's like, wait a minute, we did this before a long time ago, and then we're back to that. But it's been very fun and very interesting, and it, but it never stops. You never get to the point where, oh, we don't need to worry about that anymore. We always need to think about uh, what is the human reaction to the technology that exists.
And you've put together a brilliant book, 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People. How long into your career was it before you wrote that?
Yeah, that was let's see, that was a couple of decades in, and that was such a interesting book because that started actually not as a book. That started in 2008 as a series of blog posts. Blogging was
Ah,
very big in 2008, right? And if you were going to, be an influencer in those days, if you were an influencer, you had a blog. That's what the influencers had. And so I thought, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this blog. And I was like, what am I going to blog about? I had, um, I had watched a movie. I'm not going to remember the name of the movie. It was the movie about the woman who was blogging the recipes, Julia Child recipes. And what was the name of that movie? See, I should remember it. Maybe I'll remember it before we're done. And it was based on
Is
a
it
true story.
Julie and Julia?
Yes, yes. And she had started a blog by doing that. And I remember I read the book first and I was thinking, well, maybe, that's what I should do with my blog because people like to go on journeys with you. And that's what she did. And I said, so I'll do a journey. I'll do 100 things. And I just made up that number. And then I was like, oh my God, I need to come up with 100 things. Once I got started, I couldn't stop. I had to have the 100. So that's how it started. And I guess actually got to 100 things. And then I thought, you know what? And that was not my first book. I had written some other books before. I thought, I think I should make this into a book. And so that's how the book came about.
and I love it as a format. That was the first book of yours that I bought, and I think part of the attraction was it's easy and digestible, and I love that practical, simple
Yeah, I
approach.
can tell you of all my books, it is the most popular book. So that was the right decision to do.
And in the book, you cover lots of different areas. Maybe we could cover some of those and some of the most important bits. One of the areas you talk about is how you grab attention, how you get people to focus their attention on whatever you want to communicate. Could you take us through maybe one of the best tactics for grabbing people's attention?
Yeah, and I think you're probably gonna hear me say this the rest of our time together. It depends on the context, right? But I would say, um, if I were just giving blanket how to grab attention, probably two things. One is we want to grab the attention of the part of the pre-attention. visual cortex. So we want to just change one thing, and color is probably the most important. So if you really wanted to grab someone's attention, everything on the screen, if we're talking about a screen, would be black and white, and one thing would be this big pop of color, right? And that triggers a certain part of the brain. It's just a quick automatic trigger, and they're going to notice it. And the mistake we make is we have this is color and this is a different color and that's a different color, and then it doesn't work.
Mm.
Our brains are not triggered that way. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing I would say is, again, if it's visual, a face showing a lot of emotion, because again, there's parts of our brain that are particularly attuned to faces and parts of our brain that are particularly attuned to faces showing high emotion. And that would be what I would do. That would grab attention.
With that point about faces, have you explored why? Is there an underlying reason why people might disproportionately pay attention to faces?
Yeah, there's actually a part of the brain called the fusiform facial area, FFA. It'll be on the final, so pay attention now.
Taking notes as we go, Susan.
There's no final. There's a particular part of the brain, the FFA, and that's its job, is to pay attention to faces. It's also not just paying attention. So it'll notice right away when something looks like a face, even when it's not a face. Like, you know how some cars have like two headlights and it looks like a face? Yeah. So, but anything that looks like a face, it grabs immediate attention. And also it processes very quickly the emotion of the face. So that's why.
That's, I think, a tactic that some brands have started to use. So you've got Amazon. They have a little arrow that links the A to Z. So it looks like a smile. It looks a little bit like a face. Or the Kraft mac and cheese pack has a little upturned piece of macaroni to look like a smile. So clever ways that businesses have started to hack that. And in a busy environment like a store, they get a bit more attention than their surrounding brands.
That's right.
Have you seen any other brands cleverly use this idea
of faces? I think. I think a lot of brand. I don't know about particular brands doing it, but I know a lot of websites that will do it. If you have, I know a couple of medical device firms. They make medical devices, but if you go to their homepage, what you'll see is this smiling patient who looks like she's just been cured, with their device. So the interesting thing about faces is that we can also combine that with storytelling, right? So the picture is not just of a face showing emotion, but because of what they're wearing or where they are or who else is in the picture, it's all automatically evoking a story. And our brains like stories. So then we start to, and you got to understand most of this is unconscious, like we're not even aware of it, but we're already starting to tell ourselves the story about this woman who has just been saved by this medical device, and she's very happy, and that's all going, and in a split second, that's all going around, and it's having an impact on us.
We've heard you talk about that people process information better in story form, and how designers can harness stories. It sounds like you're starting to give us a little insight into this, but how can designers harness stories to better communicate?
Well, one way is what I just said.
Yes.
Make sure in your images, don't forget, stories are not just words, right? So make sure that in your images, you're telling a story. But you can use words and you can tell stories. And so anytime you're presenting, that same medical technology company, I remember they were a client of mine, and I remember looking at their annual report to investors, right? And it started with a story about a patient and what the device had done for her. And then it transitioned into all the statistics about how many devices and how many people and the revenue. But it started with that story, because we know that people like stories. They process information better in story format. And obviously I keep referring to the brain, and that's a lot of the work that I've done, right, is attaching what we know about the brain to then what we can and should do in our communication. But the research on the brain shows that when someone is listening to a story, their brain, parts of their brain are activating as though they were the actor in the story. Uh, and obviously not exactly, right? But if the story says, and then this person, reached for there's a part of their brain, the premotor cortex, premotor, not the motor cortex that'll make them reach, but the premotor cortex actually starts to activate as though they
Wow.
were reaching. So there's a real, it becomes very personal to us. And there's research that goes back to the 1880s. I love going back to the 1880s. That's even older than me, Gustav Freytag, who analyzed the best stories in Western civilization. And there's a whole story arc you want to use. There's like a story format that really works. It's pretty simple. You got to set the scene. You got to have a character, a main character that can either be a good guy or a bad guy, but you got to have a main character. Then there has to be rising tension. Something's happening, and then you get to that highest climax point, and then there's the falling tension. Oh, it's going to get resolved. It's going to get resolved, and then there's the resolution. And so even when I mentor people a lot, and I'm like, you use this format all the time, even like you're presenting to your stakeholders about some research you did with users. Tell it like a story. Oh, the problem was that the users couldn't find what they were looking for. And then what we did was we changed some things on the screen. And now look at the numbers. They can find what they're looking for, right? I mean, it's like, just whatever it is, use that story arc. Why not?
That's a really interesting way of thinking about it, that these aren't tactics that are just used when you are writing a novel or producing an ad. We should think of these tactics as something we use in very kind of everyday situations, like
Yes.
presenting, like persuading in a client meeting.
Yeah.
And do you think that's so effective because they're now along for the story? They're thinking about it in some way as if it's them in the story you're
Yes.
and that's why it's
Yes.
more engaging because
That's why it's more engaging, because now they've identified their part of the story. It's not just information, but
yeah,
they're emotionally engaged.
fascinating. We've heard elsewhere that you've said people are inherently lazy. And our question is, how can people adapt communications or products to reflect that, to be aware of that, to be cognizant of that?
Yeah, I love Daniel Kahneman's work,
Mm-hmm.
his book Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks in there about system one thinking and system two thinking, and the idea is that we're actually all walking around most of the time not thinking that much, like, and it's adaptive, right? If we were deeply thinking about walking out to our car, we'd never be able to even make it out to the car. So this is very adaptive. So we're all walking around in the world just not even paying that much attention to anything. And that means our brains are trying not to work hard, trying very hard not to consciously work hard. And we have to understand that. So whenever you make something hard to do, difficult, hard to understand, a lot of steps, people, you're just going to lose people. If they have a choice, they're going to say, oh, forget that. If they don't have a choice, they'll slog through it, but they'll just get more and more confused. So this is the whole idea about making things easy, and usability. And you want to make it as easy as possible. You want to eliminate all those moments of friction. And especially in the user experience work that I do with clients, I talk about, I didn't invent this term. I don't remember who did invent this term, but moments that matter, right? Because there's particular, when they have filled out the form and now you want them to press the button to submit it, or when they're initially looking at the website, but you want them to click on that donate now or whatever it is. What is that moment? That moment that's really important. Make sure there's no friction around that particular action, because you only have so much brain power that they're going to be willing or able to commit to what you're asking them to do.
Now, when we first started talking, you said, you might mention this a few times, that context is super important.
Yeah.
And I know in your books you've also said, well, there are, okay, wait a minute, make it easy, hugely important principle. But you said there are some occasions where actually adding a bit of friction in makes sense. Can you tell us when UX or product designers should add in a bit of friction?
Yeah. So this is, that's always right. We're making these generalizations, but and it doesn't always hold. Well, here's an analogy I like to use, which is if I said to you, oh, listen, I have just designed a game. I decided I wanted to be a game developer. I have this new game. You are going to love it. You don't have to think at all. There's nothing difficult to look at on the screen. And there's nothing you have to do with motor, like you don't have to use a stick or press any keys or anything. You're going to love it. You'd go, that sounds like the most boring game in the world. Like, why would I want that? Right? So we have to balance. There are times when you want to add in friction, and you want that to either be cognitive or visual or motor or a combination, to add engagement and interest. And that's what we're always balancing, is how easy is it to use versus how engaging does it need to be. If it needs to be interesting and engaging, I have to build something in, right? But you want to do it carefully, because cognitive, by the way, is the most expensive, meaning it uses the most brain resources. If people have to think, if they have to remember, if they have to decide, that's using a lot of brain energy. So that's going to be expensive. Visual is next. Doesn't take quite as many to find something on the screen. Things are coming at you, right? We find information visually. And then the least taxing is motor, right? I have to press a button. I have to use a mouse. I have to use a gesture. So you can use any of those three, but you just want to do it carefully and find that right place for your situation. Where do you get enough engagement, but not so much friction that people will give up?
It strikes me in these long form journalism articles, the most common new features are these scrolling infographics. So you're using the motor of your thumb to pull through, but actually very little text, and actually it's less taxing visually, and cognitively you see the part of the map light up and you get a half a sentence. You see something else change and a little bit more information. So I wonder if that's an example in modern mobile web design of using motor more and visual and cognitive less.
It is. And there's other things going on there, though, as well, because, again, with the brain, because that's tapping into habit, and that's tapping into dopamine. So there's, Pavlov's work back in the early 1900s taught us that we can become conditioned. We can have learned responses to particular triggers or events, and this is really what a habit is. That's what habits really are, and these become stronger and easier to create, these learned responses, when they involve a little bit of motor or muscle movement, so that scrolling thing that we're doing, it's just this habit thing then, and it's also tied to dopamine, because every time we scroll we get a little bit more information, and dopamine just loves information. Dopamine's released in our brains, and dopamine makes you curious. It makes you want to learn more. Oh, so now I do it again. Oh, there's something new. And then I learn more. And then I release more dopamine. And then I will do this again. And you just get into these dopamine classical conditioned loops. That's why it works so well. Combined with what you just said, it's a very good insight that it's a little bit of work, but not that much, right? Not that much.
Have you seen any other commercial examples of people adding in a bit of friction very successfully?
Um, I it's really tricky. I've seen people do it poorly.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
let's make it hard. I've actually had clients that said, well, because we decided we should add some friction, we're making it hard to find which button they should press. It's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
That's the moment that matters. Keep that easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think what you have to, so I don't know that I've seen a lot of really good examples of that. I think you have to use it very, very carefully and just make sure you're not doing the moments that matter.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
you're using it to engage people and hold their interest long enough to get them to that moment
How
that
about
matters, and then you do away with all of it.
How about an example of, these most new cars have these auto steer features where if you're veering off the lane, it rumbles the steering wheel just a bit to get you back into the center of the lane. Is that an example where they've introduced some friction and some interruption to your driving, but to grab your attention? Or is that,
Yeah.
am I in the wrong neighborhood
No,
here?
no, I think they are. I think they are. I have a funny story about that, though. You want to hear
Please.
my funniest story?
Yeah.
So I was on a trip to meet with a client, and I rented a car, right? And a car I'd never driven before. And I get on the highway, and I'm driving in the big city, outside of the city traffic. And as I'm driving, I feel this vibration in my butt. Okay. Now I'm wondering if you're going to edit this out because
We promise. Unedit the long cut.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, the car must be like falling apart. It's a brand new car. And so then I just, ignore it. And there it is again. And it keeps doing it. And I'm like, and then I made the connection. Instead of the steering wheel, it was in the seat. And sometimes it was on the right side, and sometimes it was on the left side, and sometimes it was both. It was so annoying. And then I had to pay attention because then I was cracking up, right?
Yeah.
and laughing hysterically while driving. So
The
I
wrong
think
place for friction. That was the wrong spot to give you friction.
So in so many ways.
Who thought that up?
That's amazing.
Well, I really like this division of cognitive, visual, manual. So I'd never thought of friction in those three ways because I think you're right. I struggle to think of examples of people doing it well. The couple I can imagine are all about manual friction. Or I think that's the phrase you use.
Motor.
So the two that I think of were the Apple box. Like Apple, when you're buying it, when you're setting it up, moments that matter maybe is very, very frictionless. But when it actually arrives in your house, you don't just tear the pack off in a second. There is literal friction. There's a kind of a suction, as it were.
Yeah.
And your point about it makes it interesting. It gives it a special status.
Yes.
So I hadn't thought of that categorization, but it seems to work with Apple. And then the other one where I think it works really well, but unfortunately an accountant has removed it, I think, was the San Pellegrino fizzy drinks, like kind of premium fizzy drink. They used to have a foil lid on it. I think that's a bit of friction.
Right.
That doesn't need any thought. Doesn't require you to look a different place.
A little different.
Yeah, but it makes it special. So I really like this categorization. I think that's a very useful.
Yeah, and that categorization, it's called human factor loads, and that goes back to like the mid 1900s. That was first developed by the pre-usability, pre-user experience. It was the people who were just working in this field called human factors came up with that kind of characterization, and I think it really holds well. It still holds because it's just this is the way humans are, right? Cognitive, visual, motor.
Yeah, fantastic. So another, moving us on to a slightly different area. Another part of the book is all around memory.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a hard task for any commercial communicator. How do you get your message remembered, or how do you get the information that you want to convey remembered? Could you give us a couple of tips in that area? What are some of the things that people could use from psychology to boost the chance that their message is remembered?
Yeah, I guess I would say I think there are three main ways, two of which might be more powerful than the third. One is repetition, right? It just repeat, repeat, repeat. We know that in um, uh, the brain connects repetition with familiarity, and familiarity with positive.
Mm.
The brain unconsciously likes things that it's familiar with, that it knows about. And if you repeat something enough, it becomes familiar. And then the brain says, oh, yeah, yeah, I know that. I've heard that before. I like that. And then we'll remember it. So repetition is one. Another one is connecting uh, the information to something that's already known. So if you can connect the information as it comes in, this is especially true for adults. There's an interesting thing that happens during adolescence. Before adolescence, every time new information comes in, the brain creates like a little new neuron branch for it, and that's why children can learn so quickly and so easily. And then during adolescence, that kind of changes. The hormones change it, and the brain kind of prunes things back. And after adolescence, when new information comes in, it will not stick unless you can attach it to something that's already there. This is why, by the way, children who learn a little bit of even a little bit of a foreign language before adolescence, later on in life, when they go back to learn that, it's easier for them to get. Whereas for if they haven't, it's like it's harder. It has to connect to things. So I think that that's useful if you can connect it to what people already know. And then the last one is emotion. So we process memories differently if they are emotionally charged. They get processed through a different brain network than if they're not emotional. And this is why you see, in commercials, there'll be some big emotional scene, some car race, and then at the end, the guy gets out holding a can of a particular soda or something, and right, because now that connection has been made between that brand and just a heightened arousal state. Uh, so that's another way that you do it, is if you can really get emotions going, a higher arousal state, and then the message, it'll just process differently and it'll stick longer.
I mean, so we've got repetition,
Repetition,
emotion, and connecting
emotion.
to something known.
Yes.
I think of those three, the most surprising one for most listeners would probably be the connecting to something already known. Could
Yeah.
you give an example of how that could be applied? So if someone is a communicator, whether it's commercial or in a meeting, is there a way that they could use that principle? Have you seen any good
Yeah.
examples?
Yeah. So um, you just, you want to, instead of just saying, uh, okay, here's the new information, right? And then you just give them the new information. You first say, you probably already know that, and then you bring up that body of knowledge that it is you are pretty sure is already in there. You already know this. Did you know? Now we're going to take the new thing, that there's another way to look at it that's a little similar, related, but a little bit different, right?
Mm.
So now when I'm learning this new thing, I'm not just learning it out of nowhere. You've already stimulated the part of my brain that holds the memory and the information about item number one, and you're attaching it. It'll just make it much easier to come in and much easier to remember that way.
Brilliant, very
And
clear.
that's a literal way to do it. In a meeting, you help them open their card catalog in their brain, go to this section and pull it up. There may be lateral ways to do it in a commercial. Your example, where you can show something like a big open field with the wind blowing or the top of a mountain, and it accesses this idea of being outside or of feeling free, and then you could insert the new thing to it. So to your point, that visual, it doesn't have to be in words. Yeah, your point is that we can do it through sight, sound, and motion as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So helpful to hear. Do you think that you've seen one be more effective than the other two? Or you said when you started, two are
Yeah,
probably more
so
than the
two of
third.
them.
So I'm wondering which
I
is which is
yeah.
which.
Oh, should I make you guess which one is the
Yes. No,
least
we should make
effective?
Richard guess.
All right, Richard. So we had the three. We had repetition, we had connected to something you already know, and we had a high emotional charge. So I think two of those are more effective than the third.
Oh, okay. I mean, I
So
would
which
go.
one is the least effective?
I guess
See,
it would
I
depend on
told them the
how emotional, how repetitive, how much repetition. But I'm going to go for the two that I think are biggest. I'm going to go emotion and repetition.
And I'll guess.
yeah.
I think it's emotion and connecting to something already known.
All right, I hate to tell you that Richard's right.
Oh,
Per
phew.
usual. Per usual. Thrilling.
And I told you there wasn't a final, but
There
there
were,
really
yeah.
was.
This is
Yeah,
that's.
yeah, there really was.
I feel like I'm back at college. Excellent, excellent. Um,
uh, this probably would have represented how we would have done had we gone to school together. So this is all stacking up just perfectly. So fascinating discussion so far. So many of our listeners work on brands that cross culture. Susan, we wanted to get a chance to hear you share. How does what we've talked about today connect to culture? How does culture? How does design? How do you think about design when you're communicating to different cultures? What's your thought on color and culture? Anything you could share with us on this?
Yeah. I think this is so difficult in so many ways because, it's important and we know it's important. And yet on a day to day basis, it's just hard to remember and to take it into account. We're so enmeshed in our own culture, and this is true not just for culture, but even generational differences. Right? There's look, for the most part, we're all humans, and our brains work the same way. So that's the good news, is that most of the stuff that I talk about in my books and in my talks are true for pretty much everybody. But there are some things that really do are affected by culture, and yet it's messy and hard to deal with that. You're developing an app for everyone in the world. How are you going to take specific cultures into account? Um, but if it's important, I had a client and they were developing an app primarily for young people in certain parts of Asia. And it's like, okay, well, here's problem number one. This thing is being developed by, uh, you know, 30-year-olds in the US. Um, we got a problem here. We have to build into the process engagement with people in that target audience and who know that target audience, or we know it's going to fall flat in some way. We don't even know how, but it probably will. So uh, the things that matter, color matters. Color has certain meanings. Red means stop or danger in some cultures, and it means good luck and fortune in other cultures. White in some cultures means clean and antiseptic, and in other cultures is the color of death, right? So these are kind of important about how you're using those colors. That's one thing. The amount of color and the amount of visual stimuli is different. Uh, there are cultures where the expectation is that things will be very colorful and there'll be a lot on the screen. And then there's cultures where if you showed a very colorful, busy screen, people will just go, "Oh, what's that?" They're just not used to it. And then another, so I would say color, I would say amount of visual clutter or things. And then the last one that I find really interesting is an idea called progressive disclosure. So one of the really good ways of lowering that cognitive load is to not show everything all at once, right? To give people a little bit of information and then they can click to get some more information. And that's it's called progressive disclosure, a very effective technique, except not in certain parts of the world where if you do that, that causes mistrust. Because then they say, "Why aren't you showing me everything all at once? What are you hiding?" Right? And so if you didn't know that and you used progressive disclosure, there's going to be this one segment over here where if that's part of your audience, you're in trouble because they're going to say, "I don't trust anything these guys are doing." So you have to really partner with people who are in that culture when you're doing your design.
I really like that as a bit of advice because it's such a simple thing to do that so often gets overlooked. But many of these kind of catastrophic areas would be avoided if you just had some people in the team who represented a particular culture or ethnicity that you're selling to.
Right.
The one example that I love of a brand failing to do that and having awful consequences. I think it's a General Motors brand, but in Britain it's called a Vauxhall. So you get Vauxhall cars, and they had a type of car probably back in the 80s, 90s called the Nova. It
Right.
sounds like kind of new. They launched it in Spain, and Nova means literally doesn't go.
Right.
So how many Spanish speakers had been a
Let's
party
buy
to
the
this
car
decision, and
that
how much
doesn't
money would have
go.
been saved if they had? Yeah. So great bit of advice. I love that. Yeah.
We're coming up to our end of time, but
Okay.
before we come to a close, let's try to squeeze in at least one more question.
Okay.
100 is a lot of things to remember.
Yes.
If we asked you to prioritize the top 2 or 3 that you think commercial users, communicators should most remember, if we couldn't end today's talk without the top 2 or 3, could we force you to rank some of
Yeah, this is
your
like
things you think are most effective?
which of my children are my favorites,
This is
right?
the
This is what
question.
you're doing to me,
Yes.
and I
Susan's
have
choice.
100 of
Yeah.
them. Okay, I'll do it. So let's see. I'll pick 3. How's that?
Perfect.
I would say one of them I would pick one of the ones we've talked about, which is if you want to grab attention visually, pick one thing, like one color. Don't overdo it. If you just want to grab attention, just pick one feature. That would be one. Another one I would say has to do with memory, uh, which is people can remember, process information only 3 to 4 things at a time. And it's interesting because not only does that have to do with remembering and processing information, it also has to do with satisfaction of their choice. There's interesting research that shows if there's just a few choices, then people are more satisfied with what they chose. So I think it's really important. Don't give people 10 choices or 10 things to remember. 3 to 4, that's the number. And then I guess the last one I would pick is just remember that most decisions are made unconsciously. People are not really consciously aware. All this stuff we're talking about is largely unconscious. You can't just ask people, do you want this or do you want that? Would you prefer it this way or that way? Because they're going to make up an answer, and they're going to believe it's the right answer, but it's probably not true. And so you've got to test things out. You can't just
Yeah.
ask people.
Because I think often a mistake that we see businesses and brands doing again and again is asking their customers and then taking
Yes.
that information at face value. I think the
Yes.
danger is often people will say, I want all the information. Give me all the information and I'll
Absolutely.
make a decision.
Right.
And then you transgress many of the other points you mentioned that actually
Yeah.
in reality people are lazy. They can't hold too much information in there.
Right.
So
Right.
that is, I think, a really powerful point to land.
Yeah.
Susan, thank you for such an interesting and wide-ranging discussion. I'm absolutely certain that everybody listening will enjoy it as much as we have.
Okay.
If folks want to learn more about the work that you do, or if they want to connect with you, we talked about an opportunity that you have coming up in January. Could you tell everybody a little bit about this?
Yeah, we have a course we teach called the Behavioral Design Workshop, which is all about all of the stuff that we're talking about. And there's a course coming up. It's a virtual online course. It's being hosted by the Smashing Conference people, and it's over the course of several. It's like 2.5 hours, but several days over a couple of weeks. So it should be easier to sign up for. And I would recommend that people check that out. The Behavioral Design Workshop, from if they just went to Smashing CONF, stands for Smashing Conference, smashingconf.com, they'll find that information.
And like we always do, we'll put this in the show notes and make sure it's in the link
Great.
so
That's
everybody
great.
can click, find it and click. And Susan, thank you for joining us today. For those listening, if you found this helpful, please share it with others to help them learn about this. And until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
Thanks so much for listening.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method One, recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in America for the third year in a row, featured on Inc.'s 5,000 list. Method One is a proudly independent creative and media agency grounded in behavioral science. They exist to make brands irresistible, helping people discover products, services, and experiences that bring moments of joy to their lives. As behavior change experts, Method One creates emotional connections that drive true brand value for their clients, focusing primarily with indulgence brands in the CPG space. Find out more at methodone.com.